The sky of Jera bled silver as the suns began their final descent. And Sarai lay on the broken altar where the elders had left her body curled in agony, her breath shallow, her pulse fading like the ebbing tide of the shrouded sea around her. The ritual was ancient and cruel, for it was believed that, when a Jaren girl was born with the mark of silence, she must return to the stars upon her 18th sun, cycle and feed the world one last time with the flicker of her soul, a gift for the future, to grow stronger for the past, to die quietly. And she had accepted this fate with a numbness that had grown in her since the first time she had seen the mark upon her wrist, a glowing spiral of light that no salve or blade could remove. And now, alone, with no chants, no prayers, just the cold wind kissing her skin and the dust settling upon her lash, she closed her eyes for the last time, knowing no one would come for her, that she would fade as she was told to fade, without resistance, without question, like all the others. But in that final moment, as her breath stilled and the stars behind her lids began to glow, she heard it, a strange humming, a rhythm not of Jera, not of anything she had known before, and then warm fingers closing around hers, not clawed, not scaled, not like the Jaren race. And her instincts screamed, but she was too weak to move, and so she opened her eyes, expecting death, expecting void, expecting the stars to take her. Instead she saw a face, a human face, eyes the color of ocean storms, skin kissed by sunlight, an expression wild with disbelief, and something else, something like rage and wonder and grief twisted together in a way no Jaren had ever shown her. And he said something, a name, perhaps a plea, but the language was not hers, and yet her soul trembled as if it had always known this sound. He had crashed 3 nights past, his ship torn by the planetary defenses Jera kept hidden beneath its surface, the pulse mines and graviton nets too much for a single explorer ship, and yet he had come, drawn by legends of a dying race who sang their history into stone and bled starlight from their skin. His orders had been simple: observe, do not interfere, log the extinction, and return. But that was before he had seen her, before his sensors picked up the fading energy signature in the mountains, before he had fought his way through electric mists and bone vine fields to reach the altar of endings. And there she was, barely breathing, her body still glowing with that soft blue light, the mark pulsing in time with her slowing heart. And something in him snapped, not the part trained by the Terran Federation, not the mission protocol, but the deeper thing, the human part, the reckless part that knew even if he saved her, even if he broke every law in the charter and defied the universe, she might still die. But he had to try. He touched her hand and felt a jolt, not just energy, not just reaction, but a connection like to mismatched stars, pulling each other into new orbit. And when her eyes opened wide and endless and filled with the pain of too many yesterdays, he knew he would never leave this world, not without her, not without trying to rewrite the story etched into the walls of her people. She whispered something, or maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was the language of the dying, and he bent closer, letting his breath match hers, letting his heart slow with hers until they beat as one uncertain pulse against the tide of fate. They found shelter in the ruins of a watchtower long since forgotten, eaten by vines and time. The night was cruel, and the air tasted of iron. But she lay curled against him, her skin still glowing dimly, her breath uneven yet present, and that was enough for him, enough to hope. He scavenged what tech he could from his wrecked ship, patched the biofield, rigged a stasis bubble, but her energy was draining too fast. And every time he looked at her eyes, he saw the stars flickering closer and closer, and still she said nothing, just watched him as if he were a story she had never believed in. He learned her name, Sarai, learned it not by words, but by the way her fingers traced it into the dust again and again, as if she needed him to remember, as if the act of remembering was what kept her anchored here. And he whispered it to her, then, when she slept, especially then. They came for her on the 3rd day, the elders cloaked in fire and light, faces hidden behind judgment and tradition, and they demanded he step away, that the ritual be completed, that balance be preserved. And he stood in front of her, shaking not with fear, but fury, for he had seen enough death, seen enough sacrifice dressed as sanctity, and he would not yield. He held his ground, even when the sky cracked open and light lanced through the ground, even when they raised their arms to tear him apart. And he screamed not words, but feeling raw and pure and unstoppable, and for the first time in Jareth's long memory, the ritual halted. Because Sarai stood the light now blazing from her skin, not in surrender, but in defiance, her body trembling not with weakness, but with will. And she took his hand and faced them, and the altar cracked beneath their feet as if the world itself had chosen to change. They wandered after that, not because they were hunted, though they were not, because they were lost, though the world had shifted beneath them, but because something old had broken, and something new was blooming, and they did not yet know its shape. Sarai began to speak not in words at first, but in light, the mark on her wrist, weaving stories into the air, and he learned to read her soul like stars, learned that her silence had never been emptiness, but a language no one had stayed long enough to hear until him. And she changed, not healed entirely, not yet, but stronger each day, her eyes clearer, her steps surer, and the glow that once drained her now became her strength, and with each sunrise she grew more vivid, more real, more alive, and the world responded, life blooming in places long barren, water returning to dry rivers, the sky itself bluer than it had been in centuries. The elders fell silent one by one, their power unraveling, as the people saw her not as an offering, but as a future, and slowly the old ways died, not with fury, not with fire, but with a breath of something better. He stayed not because he had not, because his ship was broken still, but because she looked at him now with a gaze that held galaxies. And he could no longer tell where she ended and where he began, and when she held his hand beneath the new constellation she had formed from her own starlight, he knew he had never truly understood what it meant to live until the moment she chose not to die.